Okay, well, let's carry on with our looking at German Expressionism, which has been preoccupying us over the last 2 weeks. And we've moved now to look at the artist Macke. This is The Zoo, #1 of 1912, or the Zoological Gardens, #1. He was a close friend of Franz Marc, who we were looking at towards the end last week. He's very orientated towards art in Paris. That's been true of almost all of the artists we've seen so far have got something from Paris-based art. The De Broca artists often responding to French Fauvism, for instance. Macke was in Paris 1907. He was inspired particularly by Manet and by Degas' pastels, and this led him towards experiments more with colour. He said in 1907, "My entire joy is now searching for absolutely pure colours." So he actually starts to use brighter colours before his friend Marc does so. He was back in Paris in 1908. Then he was looking at Cézanne, Gauguin, Seurat. He's back in Paris 1909. He's seeing the work of Matisse in Munich in 1910 in his native Germany, influenced by that. One difference between his work and that of Marc is that there isn't that sort of spiritual or transcendental dimension. The subject matter remains very much about modern life, about the everyday world around us. So in that sense, he's a little bit different from the content of some of the other Blaue Reiter artists, Blaue Reiter artists, with their concern for the mystical. He's not so much of a theoretician, a thinker, as they are. You do see, and this would be one of the things that would distinguish him from the De Broca artists, you do see this interest in cubism. Because they're working in a slightly later moment, cubism has a little bit more of an impact on them. So in this work, you can see the sort of effects of transparency, say, in the ear of this animal, as if you can see through it, or just the general sort of geometric quality, you can say, is something that comes from cubism. Well, here's some of the transparency effects too. Sort of knitted together, geometricized feel, which cubism, and ultimately really goes back to Cézanne and his building up of a surface through patches of colour. The particular cubist that was most influential was Delaunay. We had reason to look at an example of Delaunay and talk about his influence on Marc as well at the end last week. The same is true with Macke. He visited Delaunay in Paris in 1912. And what Macke says about Delaunay is, he says he gives movement itself, whereas the futurists illustrate movement. So he's aware of futurism, but he finds Delaunay's sense of dynamism a little bit more attractive. Never becomes quite as, never makes those steps towards abstraction that you find in Marc, and of course in Kandinsky. There's even something that sort of vaguely impressionist in a work like this. This is the Girls Under Trees of 1914. The sort of light-filled, atmospheric dimension, even though it's very stylized in an unimpressionist way, it is at the same time, analogous to something you can find in the work of Renoir. it's really not Germanic in the same way some of the other German expressionists we've been looking at are consciously seeking out German roots. There's always, of course, a tension between their interest in Paris-based art and their interest in sort of exploring national traditions. But in Macker's case, the French influences are by far the strongest ones. He also made a visit to North Africa with another of his friends, this is Paul Klee, in 1914. So there's another kind of connection there. Let's actually look at Paul Klee. So we're still looking at the Blue Reiter group artists. Paul Klee is very well known as a draftsman as much as a painter, and especially in his earlier work, draftsmanship is really what predominates and what is most interesting about his work. Sometimes a kind of nervous quality of line, very exploratory, not sort of having a fixed idea of what he's trying to do in advance of starting working, an idea that is summed up in a phase he liked, a phrase he used, taking a line for a walk. You know, the idea it's making a drawing is not like going on a route march where you know your end destination. You know, spontaneity. Yeah, well, with all kinds of creative processes, it's often a good idea to leave open room for some spontaneity in the process. You'll get somewhere much more interesting as a result. Often quite witty quality, or even a sort of childlike quality in his art, his drawing and his other art. He admired the art of children, just as other German expressionists and other modern artists in general were interested in so-called primitive art, the art of so-called primitive people. So particularly for Paul Klee, the art of childhood, which, you know, later artists like the French artist Dubuffet also took an interest in. He sought a kind of innocence in his working process. You know, that interest in the art of children, the primitive, is a way of throwing off influence or preconceptions that your training has given you to allow something new to happen. He says, I want to be as though newborn, knowing absolutely nothing about Europe, ignoring poets and fashions, to be almost primitive. Getting rid of perspective in his work, that's one way of, you know, getting rid of sophisticated traditions of art making, a way of getting rid of habits of vision that he had taken in with his training, forcing you to start again and developing your visual vocabulary. He became friends with Kandinsky in 1911. You know, the Blue Reiter is not a tightly knit group. It's a matter of individual friendships as much as anything else. But that friendship with Kandinsky is something that went on, you know, through their lives, continued to be productive in terms of artistic exchange. He had early admiration for the art of Van Gogh, for the art of Cézanne, Munch and Ensor, also named as important discoveries for him. And another big source of influence, I would say, is music. He played the violin. His wife was also a musician. So you'll see music analogies coming up in his talking about art, and I think music influences on his own production over time. As I just mentioned before, he made, maybe I'll show you one or two more drawings first, or graphic works first. This is Two Men. I've given you a sort of short title from 1903. It's like two men meeting, each thinking the other is more important than them. So they're sort of competing to outbow each other. That little kind of sort of jokey quality, which is often there in Paul Klee's work. Or Family Walk, 1930. That's jumping forward in time, but staying with the theme of graphic art and seeing how, abandonment of perspective. Of course, the forms themselves create some sense of space because we're so used to reading images in terms of perspective. We will look at these overlapping lines and we'll get ambiguous sense of three-dimensional space from them, or read all sorts of forms. Like a form like this could be read as having perspectival recession, therefore it seems to be coming out towards us at this end, or something like that. So we have ambiguous sense of spaces in there somewhere. It's not completely flat, even if there is no coherent perspective to it all. Although it's incredibly stylized, just little geometric forms, we basically know what it is. It's a group of people. Some are adults, some are children. There are pets. We can probably say what kind of pets they are. They're dogs. We know how many dogs there are. What's the problem? We don't need realism to tell us all the things we need to know about the subject matter. So we can approach it as a work of art. It's made of lines. It's not pretending to be made of whatever things in the real world happen to be made of. Old Man Counting, 1929. So there's a sort of play between form and content here, because the subject matter involves linear forms. I suppose he's counting on a sort of abacus, or counting lines, but he himself is made of lines. Southern Gardens, 1919. I was just saying that he and Macca made a journey to North Africa, to Tunisia, in 1914, and this was a really breakthrough moment for him. We saw how Macca is already an artist, very interested in colour by that point, but for Paul Klee, that was a breakthrough moment. He really starts to become interested in colour at that time, and a lot of these works, the breakthrough works, are watercolours, painting in watercolour. Colour has got me, he says. I don't need to run after it. Colour and I are one. I am a painter. Already in 1910 he'd written, nature and the study of nature are less important than one's attitude to the content of the paint box. Some day I must be able to improvise on the colour keyboard of adjacent pots of paint, starting from the whole range of possibilities of colour that are there, rather than restricting yourself to what colours just happen to be in the scene in front of you. Just as a pianist will use all the notes on the piano and doesn't feel restricted by the range of sounds that they can hear around them. Even a black and white drawing is doing that. Even if it was a very realistic drawing that someone was making, they would use everything from the pure white of the paper surface to the darkest dark. Normally they'll use the whole range. They're not concerned with what the range of tones are in reality. You just use the whole range. So why not the same with colour too? In this painting is sort of built up with a kind of honeycomb structure anyway, these little blocks of paint, loose touches, but it does provide some kind of structuring element. Of course, it goes back to Cézanne again via Delaunay, some of the same French influences here as in the art of Macca, but they produce an end result. They manifest themselves in a different style. Different people take the same influences but find different things in it. So, just tracking influences can never be enough in art history. We always need to say, well, yeah, but what did they see in that artist's work? Why were they interested in that artist's work? It's not a simple thing. The way to the citadel. Often in Paul Clay's works you have this sense of looking down on a landscape. Both the Southern Gardens and the Way to the Citadel exemplify that, although this is, a garden is often a subject for him, or a cityscape too, and often he'll use in his images linguistic signs or other symbols. Could be an exclamation mark, or in this case an arrow. It's a sort of trace of arrows as if guiding us through a complex, crowded cityscape. Map-like also in its simplicity, I suppose. Maps also stylized. Stained glass-like black outlining of every form, but color is really the most important element here. Again, there's this sort of playful, childlike quality in so many of his work. 1922, the twittering machine. You turn the handle and artificial birds will sing, and something like that. Using sort of random effects of colour, maybe pressing one surface against another to create random images, that sort of thing. Quite a range of styles, some sort of symbolic, some more abstracted, or just simply completely abstract. He has quite a bit of writing about his art, or about art in general, partly because he played a teaching role at certain stages of his life. One metaphor that he comes up with is that of the artist as artist being like a tree. The work of art is the crown of the tree, the top of the tree. And the source of art is nature, which would be like the roots of the tree. Then in that metaphor, the artist is like the trunk of the tree. And so just as the crown of the tree doesn't actually reflect the roots, so art may not reflect nature. It might not directly represent in a realistic way nature, but nevertheless it's deeply nurtured by nature. It's still related to nature. It doesn't cut itself off from nature. And the role of the artist in this metaphor is a fairly passive one. The artist is transmitting or gathering and passing on. He says, gather and pass on what comes to him from the depths. He neither serves nor rules, he transmits. I think this is something a lot of artists would say, or creative people would say, that in the creative process that there is a certain passivity, that ideas come to you, even outside of creative life. We don't decide what thoughts come into our head. Thoughts just arise and they just go too eventually. We can detain them for a while, but we don't choose up to have thoughts. Thoughts choose to come to us. There's that sort of passivity. This is quoting further from that metaphor. The creation of the work of art, the growth of the crown of the tree, must of necessity, as a result of entering into the specific dimensions of pictorial art, be accompanied by distortion of the natural form. For therein is nature reborn. He says the artist does not attach such intense importance to natural form as do so many realist critics, because for him these final forms are not the real stuff of the process of natural creation. For he places more value on the powers which do the forming than on the final forms themselves. So it's an argument against realism. We don't, there's no value, he's saying, to just imitating natural form. More important is to imitate natural processes. Well, the whole modern worldview in science as well tends to look at nature more as a process than as a thing. It's a more dynamic worldview that you get once you get down to subatomic physics and so forth. It's a kind of spiritual view again of the role of the artist. The artist's position is sort of to be sort of mimicking divine creation, just as God created the world, so you are participating in the kind of a continuing renewal and remaking of the world through your art. Artists, Clay says, should penetrate to the region of that secret place where primeval power nurtures all evolution. There where the power horse of all time and space, call it brain or heart of creation, activates every function. Who is the artist who would not dwell there? In the womb of nature, or at the source of creation, where the secret key to all lies guarded. What we're looking at here is Around the Fish, 1926. Again, some sort of linguistic-like markers. We have an arrow again, but also an exclamation mark. Other sort of symbolic forms, such as a cross. Sometimes the things we're looking at, it's almost like something you might see down a microscope. We've seen that with Kandinsky too, the interest in what microscopic life is, like the beginnings of life, like this metaphor of creation, artists mimicking divine creations, or maybe mimicking biological creation. The processes of nature are interesting to him. Fish, well, in this case the fish seems on a dish. It seems to be fish as food, a still life item, but actually fishes in different forms appear in several occasions in his work. He made a visit to the aquarium in Naples, which is one of the first public aquariums to be found in 1901 to 2 during a trip to Italy. That was particularly important to him. An aquarium is a place where you can see fish close up, isolated from their own natural environment. Park near Lucerne, 1938. In 1933 he made his way to Switzerland. He had a family connection there, because that being the year the Nazis came to power in Germany. Another sort of transformative factor in his life is from 1935 he became quite ill and in a somewhat painful way. Red Waistcoat, 1938. There are human-like presences in the work, but also, maybe animal forms, a bird, for instance. Almost reduced to a language of hieroglyphs that we almost asked to have a kind of reading attention rather than just a kind of looking at paintings attention. As if there are symbols that we can't quite decipher, the sense of meaningfulness, but meaningfulness that's withheld from us. They're pictographic symbols, so we have some sense of them, but we don't, like an Egyptian hieroglyph, but we can't quite work out what everything means. Forms link to form. Lines don't separate, they join up, and they're sort of open. The lines are not subservient to just being outlines, they have a life of their own as a formal element. In dialogue with colour, but colour is separate from line. In this case, it's fairly obedient. It doesn't cross the boundaries of lines, but it has its own boundaries. It doesn't let lines serve as its boundaries. It can have an edge without a line being there, or it creates its own linear sense. Some of these later works do have a kind of harsher, stronger quality to them, and sometimes people have related that to his illness. This is the Quarreller's Duet of 1938. Lots of different textural effects explored in his work. I'm just going to go pretty quickly through looking at some examples of independent expressionist artists or other artists in the German-speaking world of this period and later. I say German-speaking world rather than just Germany, because I'm including Austria in this story. And this is just one example I'll show you of the work of Kokoschka. A lot of his early works are, the significant early works are portraits, but they're portraits where he tries to look into the interior life of a person. Portraiture is being so concerned with the surface appearance and the social role of a person through history, but he's starting to delve inside, and of course that's a difficult task to do in portraiture. How can you first of all even know what someone's inner life is, yet alone express it through a representation of their face or something? But that searching inside for information about internal psychology, there's a sort of parallel between this Austrian artist's work, this Viennese artist's work, and the work of another famous thinker of that city, Sigmund Freud, looking behind the surface personality and finding unconscious elements there, and how the inner life is a much more raw and rich and multifarious thing than our civilized external persona would like to admit, driven by all kinds of drives according to Freud's theory. Rather than showing you one of those portraits, I'm showing instead probably his most famous work, The Bride of the Wind from 1914. That's the year of the outbreak of the First World War, in Vienna, city in the center of Europe. It's right at the heart of all that. It shows him, it's a self-portrait, with Alma Mahler, who's the widow of the composer Mahler, who was his mistress. They're sort of in bed together. It's a sort of post-coital moment, the suggestion seems to be, sort of the quiet after sexual union or something like that. But anyway, he has a wakefulness about him where she seems to be asleep, a sort of restless unsatisfied feeling, maybe, is what you're getting. It's a bed, but it's also a landscape, and the what could be read as the clothes of the bed are also read as a sort of whirlwind kind of movement that they seem to be at the centre of. All helps to create this sense of inner turmoil or restlessness. One of the artists who was displaced by the rise of the Nazis and the way the space for avant-garde art disappeared during that time, he eventually found his way to London and was living in England for the latter part of his life. I'm putting an element of contrast in deliberately here by jumping, instead of staying with other Austrian artists, a theme I've sort of started with Concussion. I'm sort of jumping to Kathy Kollwitz, German artist of a much more socially engaged temperament. This is one of the big themes of this course, in a way, the variety of different ways in which people respond to the problems of modernity, and hers is to try and look for social solutions in her art, to specify social problems, not to escape into some sort of religious kind of otherworldly response, as Kandinsky or Mark did. So I'm showing you print from her Peasants' Revolt series of prints. So this is from 1907. Actually, it's a whole series. I'm just showing you two from towards the start and towards the end. It has a kind of narrative development. It's a theme of rape, if you like, and then there's a Peasants' Revolt comes up. And then the story goes back to quiet again at the end. A woman searching for her loved ones, amongst the dead at night. It relates to the a historic event going back to the 1500s, to around 1525, the Peasants' Revolt in Germany, which was one. Before the French Revolution, probably the most serious uprising in Europe, failed and bloodily suppressed uprising of the peasants, partly inspired by Protestant ideas that giving them new ammunition. Her own son died in the First World War. That's after the date of this, but she's personally involved with the tragedy of loss. And this is an explicitly political woodcut, whereas the Peasants' Revolts are etchings. You see the difference in style, the more clear-cut areas of black and white, larger areas of black, solid areas of solid tone. It's the memorial for Karl Liebknecht, so one of two leaders of a left-wing group, and murdered during turmoil just at the end of the First World War in Germany, when there's a strong sort of socialist, attempt to seize power that ultimately fails. So she's aligning herself to that left-wing cause. Back to Austria, and again, I'm just trying to produce this sense of contrast by showing the different things going on, more or less in the same time frame. this is sort of the last years of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Klimt is a major figure in Austrian art of that time. This is his Judith of 1901. Judith, it's an Old Testament story of Judith and Holofernes. Judith was the Jewish heroine who defeated Holofernes she entered into the enemy camp and seduced him and then cut off his head. So she's presented here as a sort of femme fatale, a dangerous woman, because the backdrop to all this is the broadly changing positions of women in society and the kind of the male reaction against that. It's within that kind of context of increasing female social power, women escaping from the restraints of existing social roles, that a work like this can play with those fears and possibilities of that moment. So she achieved her victory over Holofernes through her seductive beauty, and she's now launching that beauty out towards us, the spectator. We're in the firing line, if you like, for that. As with many of Klimt's work, we're seeing this kind of quite extreme, realistic quality of the figure, but nevertheless a sort of modernistic flatness of the space around her, which actually comes across the figure as well. Very lovely sort of decorative elements, and the use of gold is typical. It gives a sort of reference back to Byzantine art, to earlier traditions. He's making an investigation of different decorative art tradition. Art Nouveau is big in Vienna. So all this is part of the influence on all these sort of stylized plant forms we get. Embossing of the title on the work itself. One of his most famous images, The Kiss of 1907-8, much reproduced as a poster and so forth in more recent times. Again, you have the gold background. It's very decorative effect, not completely flat, as you can see. He's activated it in little sort of dots of snow-like kind of effect. And the clothing also is very patterned and helps to distinguish between the male and female areas of the painting, the geometric forms of the man's dress, and more circular forms of the female dress. Of course, the theme of Kiss brings up the idea of unity between male and female, harmony between opposites, and that's the way the work has often been read. But if you look at there's not actually a sort of face-to-face kiss going on here. There's just a little bit, maybe even of resistance, you want to say. The woman's resisting a little bit the man's attention. There's a certain sort of tension in her pose, perhaps. Well, it's open to interpretation, but, I think one needs to do a bit of interpretation. We can't just assume it's a picture of a kiss because the title says it's a picture of a kiss, and therefore everything, have a lovely romantic story about the painting. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a theme that he comes back to, two versions. This is in 1909. Again, the decorative patterns of the clothing in the background are so important to the image as a whole. Play between two-dimensional design and a little bit more three-dimensionality when it comes to the features. a sort of interestingly hybrid mode that he used.
Why do they always wear like huge robes? I'm not sure if he has any influence from Japanese.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, that's all part of it. Japanese art is definitely something that he's aware of. Yeah, but he's exploring a number of different kind of visual traditions, I think. Yeah. You say the pose is sort of theatrical in a way. It's very sort of artificial. It's not a sort of natural, everyday kind of pose. And some landscape works by him, but mainly he's a figurative artist. A society portraitist as much as anything else. This is his portrait of Hermione Gallia. Schiele, Egon Schiele. You can treat him as a sort of follower of Klimt. It's actually in their drawings perhaps that they're the closest. But Schiele is looking more, at the negative side of human emotions and scraping away at the surface mask of society to see what's underneath. So, for example, this cardinal and nun, well, two religious figures, but shown as lovers. Maybe you could almost read it as a kind of remake of the kiss in a way. It's a couple embracing, but this is a sort of transgressive image of two religious figures who should be leading celibate lives. Underneath all that kind of control and conscious belief system, desire comes up and takes control. So again, it's something that fits in nicely with Freudian ideas and so forth. That's an attack on a major social institution in a way to show a cardinal and a nun as in a sexual embrace. A lot of his interesting work is just in a medium of drawing with paint added, more graphic style. Some of them including self-portraits, autobiographical, I think you would want to call it, expressions of his own feelings, dramatized self-portraits. This is the Standing New Girl, 1910, but it belongs to that same pattern. Often these slightly emaciated figures, very wiry quality of line, stylized quality. Knobbly fingers, very expressive hands. Self-consciousness, looking out at the spectator, aware of being observed, meeting our gaze, looking back at us. This sort of lovely kind of linear quality he has as an artist, a strong kind of line. It is a strength of his work. Erotic subject matter. This sort of slightly emaciated feel that makes you aware of the body's vulnerability, mortality. All of the elegance and the decorative richness of Klimt's work are stripped away here. Even in the cardinal and nun, all that kind of rich areas of decoration have disappeared. but in the drawings, just a simple bare background, really. It's typical that the backgrounds are often left bare. Beckmann. I'm moving now to look at work from the period after the First World War. This is the period in Germany known as the Weimar Republic. It's a period of democratic government, but repeatedly failing democratic governments, sort of shifting coalitions that never can quite establish themselves, that collapse, and then another one comes along, leading some people to even feel that that democracy is a failure. It's within that context that Hitler arises, and there are particular spurs to his rise. One is that the victorious Allies in the First World War imposed quite strict terms on Germany. Some German land was taken by France, for instance, and Germany was required to pay reparations for its part in the war, and that kind of harsh treatment of Germany led to a revival of German nationalism that led towards the Second World War. The other big factor in Hitler's rise, I suppose, is the Great Depression. Starting maybe with the Wall Street crash, and then spreading around the whole capitalist world, the intrinsic instability of capitalism, the cyclical nature of capitalism. That led us to the Great Depression, hyperinflation in Germany, and then the search for a strong leader as a way out from all that problem, willing to sacrifice democracy in the process, perhaps. Well, although Hitler was democratically elected and then passed laws that disestablished the Weimar Republic from 1933. That's the breakthrough year when you start to see authoritarian single-party rule emerging. So the art of that Weimar Republic, that intervening period between the First World War and the rise of the Nazis taking power. Some of the artists involved are reacting against the expressive quality of much of their pre-war work. Sometimes a word is used to describe, a little bit awkwardly, a lot of the art produced at that period. That is new objectivity. Actually, that term it's not really a proper style label in the sense that it's applied to artists that are really very different in style. Sometimes Beckmann is included in it. So yeah, there's a little bit of the less personal expressivity of touch, and use of colour in an expressive way in his work. This is the Departure triptych of 1932-5. So 3 panelled painting. That's sort of mimicking, like a medieval altarpiece that might open up. Wings would open up, could then close. So again, he's still an artist looking back to the Germanic past, and even the sort of crowded quality of the painting that mimics something of a sort of medieval art, perhaps in a loose way. It's a sort of harsh, everyday light. It's not the spiritual intimations you get in some Blaue Reiter artist's work. The mood of the 2 external wings seems rather similar, very tortured forms people bound up, physically tortured. The central panel, there's a more open kind of space. The two external panels, it's very crowded, narrow, confined space suitable for the activities taking place in it. The central one is much more open and has a more kind of mythic theme, a king with his crown or something like that. Masks, strange mask figure. They're in a boat. They're out in an open sea. There's more sense of a liberty there. But ultimately, really rather hard to pin down what the... It's got a sort of a nightmarish kind of indecipherability about it all. You know, some sort of endless cycle of something negative you can't quite escape from and can't quite decipher, like in a dream. Beckmann himself had served in the First World War in the I think it was in the ambulance corps, and as you know, suffered some wounding in the process. Yeah, he's in a medical corps in the First World War, and so he's very aware of the traumas of war. In the Second World War period, he was in Amsterdam, and then he eventually found his way to the United States. Amongst his later work, a lot of portraits, self-portraits. This is 1944, so it's actually during the Second World War. Very self-conscious, sort of looking out at the spectator. Just in terms of painterly technique, he's always very strong and very distinctive kind of style. He was one of the artists who was really quite influential in the 1980s, when, in reaction against the dominance of abstract art, a lot of artists in Europe started to turn again towards figuration, German artists, but also of other countries in Europe. Schad, Christian Schad, a self-portrait from 1927. For a long time, not very much attention was paid to him, but he's certainly one of the artists you could apply this label new objectivity to. You can see some aspect of new objectivity would be a return to explore the possibilities of realism. That could be amongst artists who want to produce a leftist political art. Schad perhaps is more ambiguous. He's one of the artists who wasn't attacked by the Nazis. I think because of the realism of his style, he was a relatively unknown artist to them, I suppose. They even included his work in an exhibition that promoted a positive image of German art during that time. So he sort of found his way through, as well as these very intensely sharp, realist figure paintings. He also made early experiments with photography, what you might call photograms, that is, putting actual objects directly on photographic paper and then exposing it to light and creating kind of shadowy images. Another artist who did that was the artist Man Ray. In fact, Fox Talbot, one of the early pioneers of photography, also did it, but that was one of his innovations. Otto Dix, he also produced work where you have this sort of greater sense of realistic detail. There's still something modernist about his stylistic language. It isn't a going back to realism as we knew it before modernism, but there is something there of a kind of greater attention to detail. This is Dixie's portrait of the journalist Sylvia von Harden, 1926. So this is documenting the Weimar Republic years. in his work you see the trauma of war, which would have been so visible in the Weimar Republic. So many people hobbling around on crutches and with missing limbs and begging in the street. You know, the war is over, but you're very aware that you're in a post-war period. And Dixie's work helps to specify that moment. He also goes back into the war itself in a massive series of etchings that he undertakes. He had volunteered for the German army in the First World War, serving in the field artillery. In one of the most horrific battles of the First World War, the Battle of the Somme, he was there in charge of a machine gun unit, seriously wounded, and so when he shows the First World War in this series of etchings, just entitled War, from 1924, he's definitely working from personal experience. So here's a field pockmarked by artillery shells and explosions. You know, it's land, but land that's been kind of raped, really. The First World War is one of the characteristic features of it was trench warfare. So this is the capturing that experience of trench warfare, and dead bodies could be there, alongside the living soldiers. And maybe there's not time to remove. Perhaps that's what this image is trying to remind us of, but more generally it just reminds us of death, as the omnipresence of death in war. Lovely exploration of the expressive possibilities of the engraving, of the etching medium. Gas, of course, was one of the modern technologies of warfare that emerged in the First World War. So in this image from the series, he's showing you, gas masks, which all the soldiers would hope to have. It creates this kind of mask-like, dehumanizing faces. And just to say a little bit about the visual culture of the Nazi period, characteristically, we don't tend to talk in art history much about the art history of fascism. Like for instance, in the 1980s, there was a big show in the Royal Academy in London of 20th century German art, and there were no Nazi artworks on display in that show. There was just a few kind of display boards explaining about art during that period. So there's a sort of taboo. More recently, art historians have written books on that specific period, but often it's left out of the general histories in a rather strange way. You would never think of leaving the Nazi period out of a general political history, for instance. The Nazis were very against modern art and confiscated it from museums and so forth. There was a little bit of support for Expressionism from some Nazi leaders to begin with. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, I may have mentioned this last week, collected some German Expressionist art, but pretty soon it moved in favor of realism and classicism. There was a famous exhibition about the art that was considered decadent. I'm showing you photographic documentation about that. This is the catalogue, and all the confiscated art, sculptures and paintings were put in a display, and it was very popular. A lot of people went to see it. You see it's like a queue for a blockbuster exhibition. people wanted to see modern art being attacked. So the formal distortions of expressive art were taken as signs of degeneration. For anyone interested in curatorship, I mean, it's actually very advanced in a way in its kind of curatorial setting. I think you can make out as a Brancusi here. And anything that seems sort of primitive, that's to do with, other races. Racial purity was a very important thing for the Nazis. So anything that bespoke other cultures and so-called primitive cultures was a bad thing. The Nazis, for their part, preferred a sort of classicized kind of mode. This is Brecker. The others I won't even bother to tell you the names of the artists. They're not really important. This is a kind of modern version of the Judgment of Paris, classical mythological topos that's found in art, but set in present day. So classical beauty as a sign of healthiness and national healthiness, sometimes directly depicting, Nazi soldiers or whatever, but not necessarily. Nazi art didn't always do that. There's a museum in Munich that puts some of this art on display, but it's actually rather hard to see in Germany today. Brecker had something of a revival of his reputation in more recent times, but only a little bit. And just to finish this before we have our rather late break, a couple of examples of German artists from the 80s and onwards who return to a kind of expressionistic, figurative quality that is so often found in German expressionist art. One is Basileus. Basileus, this is a Jew of 1982, and I haven't put the slide upside down by mistake. It's actually a characteristic of a lot of his work after a certain point to turn the images upside down, I suppose as a way of having figurative qualities, but also to have a sort of modern abstractiveness as well, to emphasize formal values. It becomes, to me, a slightly irritating trait when he repeats it year after year after year. And in more recent work, he's found ways to kind of break away from it a little bit. Another artist returning to figuration and expressionistic qualities in German art of this time is Anselm Kiefer, very famous artist. And his work is interesting because he's looking back over the wartime period in a way. His is an art with a historical gaze to it, historical memory to it. And that's, compared to the two main defeated countries in the Second World War, I think it's fair to say that Germany has had much more of a national debate about how did we become those people that did those terrible things than the Japanese have, for various reasons. So Kiefer is part of that story. Your Golden Hair, Marguerite, of 1981. This is a line quoted from a poem by Paul Celan, which refers back to the period of the Nazi Holocaust, the killing of the 6 million Jews, not just the horror of war in general, but that mechanized, rational process of killing. It's a landscape and straw, actual elements of the landscape collaged into the painting. and maybe representing, the hair referred to, your golden hair. The poem compares a dark-haired woman, which could be a Jewish woman, therefore the victim, with the golden hair as the archetypal blonde Germanic woman. The words onto the painting itself. And the landscape, a very ruptured, damaged, tortured landscape, it seems. Well, same here in this work, which is called The Painting Equals Burning, 1974. Painter's palette. A landscape as if a landscape that's been destroyed by warfare. A landscape that bears the memories of war. Sometimes in a retreating army, you'll have something called a burnt earth policy. You just destroy all the crops as you retreat, so that the invading army coming after you can't use it. In this work, To the Unknown Painter, 1983, he actually introduces what, in the German context, would be quite well-known architectural motif, and that is, just to show you, the chancellery of Hitler. It's a sort of building that was at the center of power of the Nazi regime, place from which, though, so many terrible things were done. So he brings it back, rather, memory versus forgetting. Instead of wanting to move beyond, he wants to come back in uncomfortable memories, not just comforting memories. The past interrupting the present's closures. Well, there's so much that could be said, but of course we're not here to talk about these artists in their own right. I'm just trying to show how something that was there in German Expressionism does come back again in later art. His painterly touches and figurative dimension is something that the German Expressionist legacy helps to allow. Okay, let's take our break there.